Let's take a look at one of the stories from Genesis and see how you can divide it and get two complete narratives that make sense. We will examine the Joseph narrative. In the February 1972 edition of Awake, Who Wrote the Pentateuch, it quotes the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible. There are two accounts of what happened, which have been blended into confusion. The quote continues with a description of one way that the text of Genesis 37 can be split into two versions. To start, let's look at Genesis 37, verse 28, and Genesis 37, verse 36. Here we see it switch from Midianites to Ishmaelites in the same verse, and then back to Midianites at the end of the story. This gives a clue of something unusual. And when the Midianite merchants were passing by, they lifted Joseph up out of the water pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. These men took Joseph into Egypt. Now the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, a court official of Pharaoh and the chief of the guard. Awake responds, the fact that the terms Midianites and Ishmaelites are seemingly used interchangeably poses no problem. Being descendants of Abraham through his sons Ishmael and Midian, the two peoples doubtless were very much alike in their way of life, and intermarriage could have resulted in a further amalgamation. It may also be that the Midianite merchants were traveling in the Ishmaelite caravan. Doubtless? Could have? It may also be? This is often a problem with JW literature. They use suppositions and unprovable speculation. There are scholars that would agree that Midianites and Ishmaelites could be conflated with each other for the reasons given in Awake. However, the story doesn't quite end in Genesis 37, verse 36. In Genesis 39, now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and an Egyptian named Potiphar, a court official of Pharaoh and chief of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. But we've already been told that it was the Midianites who sold him to Potiphar. Did it really need repeating? This time with the Ishmaelites? Both times explaining Potiphar's position under Pharaoh? It doesn't seem that they are being conflated with each other. We can also look to other verses in the text to support our claim. Try verse 22 and verse 26. In verse 22, Reuben has already persuaded the brothers not to kill Joseph. In verse 26, it seems that Judah now wants to persuade them all over again. Why does this persuasion happen twice? Awake tries to combat this by saying that the brothers would have killed Joseph by leaving him in the pit. But the whole point Reuben was making was not to take Joseph's life at all, as he says in verse 21 and verse 22. The fact is, we can split the text and get two distinct and coherent stories. Here we shall illustrate a method of doing so found on the website thetorah.com from an article by Ben Sadler that uses Richard Elliott Friedman's breakdown of the verses in his The Bible with Sources Revealed. I've used the New World Translation for familiarity, but English translations are not the best for this purpose. I would encourage you to see how it is done on the website in Hebrew with an English translation of the split. First, the Judah version. So they said to one another, "Look, here comes that dreamer. Come, now, let us kill him and pitch him into one of the water pits, and we will say that a vicious wild animal devoured him. Then let us see what will become of his dreams." So as soon as Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his robe, the special robe that he wore. When they looked up, there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying labdanum gum, balsam, and resinous bark, and they were on their way down to Egypt. At this Judah said to his brothers, "What profit would there be if we killed our brother and covered over his blood? Come now, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and do not let our hand be upon him. After all, he is our brother, our flesh." So they listened to their brother. They sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. These men took Joseph into Egypt. So they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the robe in the blood. After that, they sent the special robe to their father and said, "This is what we found. Please examine whether this is your son's robe or not." Then he examined it and exclaimed, "It is my son's robe. A vicious wild animal must have devoured him." Joseph is surely torn to pieces. With that, Jacob ripped his garments apart and put sackcloth around his waist and mourned his son for many days. And all his sons and all his daughters kept trying to comfort him, but he kept refusing to take comfort, saying, "I will go down into the grave mourning my son." And his father continued weeping for him. Now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and an Egyptian named Potiphar, a court official of Pharaoh and chief of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. Now, the Reuben version. Now they caught sight of him from a distance, and before he reached them, they began plotting against him to put him to death. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from them, so he said, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Do not shed blood. Throw him into this water pit in the wilderness, but do not harm him." His purpose was to rescue him from them in order to return him to his father. And they took him and threw him into the water pit. At the time the pit was empty, there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. And when the Midianite merchants were passing by, they lifted Joseph up out of the water pit. Later, when Reuben returned to the water pit and saw that Joseph was not in the water pit, he ripped his garments apart. When he returned to his brothers, he exclaimed, "The child is gone. And what am I going to do?" Now the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, a court official of Pharaoh and the chief of the guard. Now, remember that Bible chapter and verse divisions are not original to the text. They were added much, much later. So the fact that some of the proposed story divisions start or end halfway through a verse is not a valid reason to critique the separation of the two narratives. Scholars analyze the text in biblical Hebrew, where there are no full stops, let alone chapter or verse markers. The two stories are complete and coherent. The documentary hypothesis is not an attack on the Bible, but a way of understanding its depth, complexity, and development over time.